Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome to Frank Analysis. I am your host, Franco, and today we are continuing the reading of The Tao of Systems Thinking by Michael McCurley. And I gave this book a review back when I read chapter 1. And where did we leave off? Right, we were in chapter 3, now we're going to read chapter 4. And I highly recommend this book so that it can help you become a better thinker and so that you can understand the world around you better. All right, so chapter 4 is called Models and Government. To have a vision, so these are passages 28 to 36. We're starting with passage 28. To have a vision for a world dynamics model is to be a model for the world. Be humble. To become a source of knowledge for the world, you must return to the primordial. Simplicity is a key factor. The tailor who works best makes the fewest cuts. 4.28 Modeling world dynamics. There are a few people who model the world like J.W. Forrester, but not many of them. When they do this, others are quick to react and try to negate what has turned out to be well-reasoned warnings about the impacts of our behaviors on the planet. This may happen because some people are against any limits on their actions or behaviors, even when these limit the future for what others can do. When people become models for the world, other like-minded people will follow and respond. Even those who question them will carry forward a debate for the rest of us to consider. At some point, we will become aware when a critical mass has been reached. Now we get to passage 29. One who hopes to conquer the world cannot succeed. Our world is a sacred place and cannot be manipulated or dominated. For that reason, there is a time to move forward and a time to move back, a time to increase and a time to decrease. One who is wise avoids extremes and excesses. 4.29 The myth of global domination. Among those who think the world are those who want to dominate it. Among those who think about the world are those who want to dominate it. Who hasn't thought about conquering the world at one time or another? People who try to conquer the world have certainly thought about it. That's why we are where we are, wherever that may be. Will people who try to dominate the world actually prosper? This cannot be possible in the long run. For inhabitants of this planet, it is impractical to dominate extensive parts of it for more than limited periods of time, which are determined by rather short human lifespans. There may be moments in which dictators may succeed, followed by others in which they fail. As we know, there's a time to grow, a time to decrease, a time to live, and a time to die. All these are governed more by system laws than by human beings. Passage 30. One should not attempt to govern by force because that force tends to revert against those who use it. What one wants is to protect boundaries, not to promote expansion. Excessive expansion precipitates collapse. What runs contrary to this principle will cease to exist. 4.30 Superpowers and the Arms Race. At one time in our not-so-distant history, two superpowers seriously competed to produce weapons of mass destruction which could annihilate nearly all living creatures on our planet, especially our species. Both superpowers engaged in a global nuclear arms race, which proceeded rapidly until one generation succeeded the next. Then one of the superpowers collapsed, while even the other came to question what in the world it was doing. This was not before those powers and other nations who joined this collective hysteria had produced more than 100,000 nuclear warheads, more than enough to destroy all cities of any importance inhabited by human beings on this planet. And for a lot of you guys out there, you guys listen to a lot of news, a lot of alt media or independent media. I think that there needs to be more discussion about these warheads, about what nuclear war would look like, about how there needs to be a disarmament of nuclear weapons. At some point, a few more level-headed leaders were somehow able to step away from this massive insanity, but only after 2 cities were destroyed in seconds at the end of the Second World War. It was not until an entire generation had passed that people realized they had no inclination for destroying more cities with atomic weapons, even as sophisticated weapons development made it much easier to do this. Since then, a few leaders have made lukewarm gestures for disarmament, while others still hold onto those relics of mass destruction, perhaps out of fear or nostalgia, or just because they can, which isn't far from state-sanctioned terrorism, though we are advised that for our own defense, we have the capacity to destroy ourselves. Such is the logic of armaments and war. I just want to point out that the defense that people give for other countries other than the US to have nuclear weapons is to say that, oh, well, the US has nuclear weapons and they're the biggest powerhouse right now, military powerhouse. And it's kind of, besides being the most powerful or the biggest powerhouse, it's kind of the same argument that the US uses for why they have nuclear weapons. They're like, oh, we need to defend ourselves from other countries. I think that I personally think, and you guys can let me know in the comments what you guys think, but I personally think that all nations should disarm. Doesn't matter who does it first, we should all do it. If it's at the same time, that's probably going to be the best. Passage 31. Sophisticated weapons of war presage calamity. To rejoice in military victory is to rejoice in the killing of human beings. This cannot translate into prosperity for our species. Sooner or later, every war is a massive funeral. 4.31 Global Warfare. During the 20th century, like other centuries before it, different nations of our species fought in several wars, including World War II, which cost more than 50 million lives. After more than 100 million casualties in 2 world wars, we came to realize that the people who became our enemies could have been our friends. This wasn't much different from what people learned during the 19th century, but had somehow forgotten. Friends became our enemies, then these enemies became our friends, and so on. Every generation is much like the next, since people end up fighting each other and then make peace later to become friends. Those we fought against were not very different from ourselves. In fact, genetically, they were nearly identical, but outwardly they seemed different. So people dehumanized others in order to kill them. This came from the error of believing there were superior groups of our species who somehow had the rights to control, conquer, or wage war with others. And this came from the leaders of their governments or people who controlled them, not from the general masses who inhabit the planet. For the millions who died as a result of fighting among ourselves as a species, these wars were massive funerals. For every country that celebrates its own Memorial Day, there are more important lessons to be learned than valor and patriotism. Our world does not exist to be dominated or controlled, and any efforts to do this are soon extinguished. Instead, our world is meant to be shared and appreciated. There's no need for warfare to do this. Passage 32. Out of simplicity comes complexity. The universal lacks a name, although what is primordial, self-organizing, simple, and small, it is in no way inferior to everything else, and all things are subservient to it. 4.32 Organizing Principles. The organizing principles of our universe have simple fundamental roots. All that exists is ultimately energy, matter, space, and time. While these principles are simple, what comes from them in endless combinations is more complex. Just as an entire language comes from a few dozen letters with vowel and consonant sounds, we will also find that most of the physical universe is based on a few dozen principles. To understand how things are organized, we should look for root causes. Complex systems are based on simpler components. We should simplify and look at basic relations before we attempt to work with more complex ones. Problem solving works in the same ways. We need to identify the root cause of problems before we can solve them. If we deal with symptoms instead of causes, it's likely we will find lasting solutions for the problems we face. It is also unlikely we will resolve issues unless we recognize when our own participation produced them in the first place. For such reasoning comes the saying, tomorrow's problems come from today's solutions. Although this sounds pessimistic, it's often true. So what this makes me think of is how a lot of people who get politically involved think that the solution is to just replace one administration with another administration. They think that the solution is to vote out one administration, get another administration in, but they don't understand the root of the complex system that we have right now, the complex political system. All right, a lot of you guys already know, a lot of my viewers already know that both parties are owned by the same people, and so it doesn't matter which administration is in there. They're all going to do the bidding of the lobbyists. So that's understanding the root of it. The root of the complex political system is that it works for lobbyists, it doesn't work for the people. All right, and you can use that kind of thinking, taking a complex system and looking at the roots. You can use that for other complex systems, try to understand it better, and so that you can come to a better solution. All right, for example, understanding that lobbyists control our election system and understanding that they control both major political parties helps you to realize that voting in an election system that we have no control over is not a solution. We need to do other things. And the reason why we have this current system right now, this current capitalist system, is because we were exploited, and because collectively our consciousness, our level of consciousness is low. Now we go to passage 33. One who can know and conquer oneself is truly powerful, who knows when abundance is enough. Anyone who follows the means of systems is someone with constant purpose. 4.33 Expanding Awareness. A higher value of knowledge is based on individual perceptions and our greater awareness as a species. Although we prize individualism to a great degree, our cooperation as a species is impaired when we are reduced to primitive levels of competition. Inner individual competition is useful for those who control us because we tend to compete more with each other on similar levels and pay less attention to those who exercise control on higher levels through social, government, or corporate domination. All right, this makes me think of a lot of the social divide that we have in our country right now. A lot of that is amplified by the media and amplified by algorithms on social media, right? It's trying to create competition between different groups of people. And then this distracts them from what people are doing at higher levels of control, right? What the ruling class can do. Those who practice self-control and free themselves from the controlling influence of their own egos will generally become more aware. Systems thinking provides a framework for thinking socially and globally. As people become aware, they will see reasons for cooperating with others for more than money or material possessions. Accomplishing this is difficult, however, since it's easier for people to accept what they know than to anticipate what they can accomplish in the future. Creative minds, however, have always been capable of doing this and will be interested in exploiting these potentials. Passage 34. The universal means is like a powerful current that feeds us but isn't consumed. All things return to it as to their homes. 4.34. The underlying balance of global energy and resources. The universal force is a powerful field of current of energy that surrounds us. Although we may feed on this current, it is self-renovating and never consumed. Global systems are cyclic and regenerative. This contrasts sharply with how most people think, whose perceptions are limited by linear, consecutive time frameworks, which assume that material resources are consumed, will run out or be lost. This shows we're limited by economic perspectives we've learned in order to survive. While there are limitations to non-renewable resources, this paradigm is taught to us by those who dominate resources which might otherwise be accessible for everyone else. Their power comes more from their abilities to limit resources and control others than from making those resources available, because this would destroy their power base. In spite of this, we sense an underlying abundance of our planet's resources. This quietly reinforces the principle of enough if we could learn how to share. In reality, we belong to the earth more than it belongs to us. The earth existed long before we appeared, and it will probably exist long after we have finished our life cycle as a species. This implies that ownership is more of an imaginary issue, what we believe or think as an agreed upon game, not a prerequisite for our survival. Money divides us from the resources we use. Pretty much saying money's an illusion. And we've been taught to think that the way our economic system works is how we should operate, because this helps us survive in this system. But the system doesn't have to be this way. Passage 35. Those who have learned about modeling can simulate many things. They can test them without harm and can model lasting effects, though these haven't yet been tested in reality. Creating models. 4.35. Creating models. People who create and simulate models are able to check behaviors and possible outcomes of systems they can replicate from the real world. Modeling is simply another way of thinking. We all have mental models of one sort or another, although some of these are often not well thought out or clearly expressed. A system dynamics model may not be significantly better than other mental models, but it's easier to validate and test because it can simulate a wide variety of behaviors and is expressed using the language of mathematics. Now that personal computers are widely available, more people can create simulation models and observe their results. Models can be tested without risking real resources that may become scarce or unavailable. In addition, a model can be tested without serious consequences while applying drastic real decisions could have impacts with unpredictable results. By testing multiple possibilities, modeling may help us to expand our horizons, not because what we discover will be perfect, but because we will have considered more possibilities and scenarios. Passage 36. Here is a subtle wisdom of life. There are weaker forces which have leverage over stronger ones. 4.36. Simulating outcomes. People who calculate on the basis of strength look for what is impressive. That is an error of judgment. What we see as overt power depends upon simple origins. We'll be unable to move forward without clearly understanding those origins and returning to them. Those who are wise realize that weaker forces have leverage over stronger ones. This may not be immediately apparent, but consider the hidden power of atomic physics. What's least apparent is the most powerful of all. Who would have imagined that nuclear power within the atom is thousands of times more powerful than the chemical bonds and matter we have known? The power of chemical explosives has no comparison to that of nuclear ones, and yet we had no idea about nuclear energy until the 20th century. Leverage isn't what most would think. A real understanding of underlying principles allows us to do things we never would have conceived of, with equally unimaginable consequences, unless we can somehow be prepared. Knowing the technologies involved isn't enough. As we can see from our behaviors after we discovered and started to produce nuclear weapons. For that reason, people mindlessly produced weapons without realizing what they were doing out of fear until they gradually became aware that their ability to create nuclear expansions was quite distant from an actual desire to deploy them and destroy everyone. Awareness goes beyond mere consciousness or knowledge. It implies deeper perceptions than most people normally achieve. Though this is what we hope to attain as a species. Surprisingly, there are small signs we're moving in the right direction. The most important of what we learn may resonate until it becomes a common cause for all of us. I really love how this book criticizes how we have nuclear weapons and how we've produced so many of them, hundreds of thousands of them. And that's certainly something that we need to become more aware of and we need to have more discussions about. I see Ricky Berwick's mommy in the chat. I see you, Luna. How's it going? So that's it for chapter 4, guys. Let me know what you guys think and stay informed. I'll see you in the next one.